I ask you a question, Stephen?
Go ahead.
Would you take a 3-year career break? Would you be able to do that?
Would I be able to take a 3-year?
Emotionally, mentally?
So I would be, it's possible, but would that be my choice? No. It's obviously possible because I have the means to, so I'm a different person, I'm a slightly more privileged person to ask. But would I want to take 3 years off my career, stop doing this, to solely raise children? I would not want to.
You would struggle. And the thing is, men aren't expected to. So
we have different nurturing hormones. We have a biology that's really different.
I think we just need to take into account that no one is judging Stephen for saying that. But if I said, just couldn't do it, people would be like, and that societal expectation and that societal guilt needs to be acknowledged.
But men and women are different.
They are different.
Stephen could say other things which would have people's jaws on the floor. Like, I don't want to financially support my wife and child. I think people would be quite shocked by that. I mean, we just have different expectations from mothers and fathers.
I just don't want to go back to men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
No, I want to give some evidence of that. So there is hormonal research to show that men and women respond to nurturing differently. We have different hormones, different amounts of hormones. It comes from different parts of our brain. Women produce when they give birth, when they breastfeed, when they nurture their young, they produce a ton of oxytocin, if they're healthy. Oxytocin helps you to attach to your baby, and it also is inversely connected to cortisol. So it lowers the baby's stress, it lowers your stress, and it raises the well-being of the baby and the well-being in you. And so what we know is that oxytocin is passed back and forth between babies and mothers, right brain to right brain connection. Oxytocin makes mothers sensitive, empathic nurturers. It makes them very attuned to the distress of their babies. When fathers produce oxytocin, when they stay home, it comes from a different part of their brain, and it makes them more playful, tactile stimulators of babies. They tickle the babies, they throw them up in the air, they chase them around, they encourage risk-taking, they encourage exploration. They're great with separation. But in terms of providing that emotional security and that emotional regulation in those early days, mothers do it differently. Fathers produce a lot of vasopressin. It's called the protective aggressive hormone. There was a study that was done where fathers and mothers lay in bed together. It was done in the UK. And when the baby cried, almost nearly every time the mother woke up in the middle of the night to the baby's cries, and the father slept through it. But when there was a rustling of leaves outside the window, the fathers woke up and the mother slept through it because of the predatorial threat. We are wired. We are mammals. We are not better than mammals. We are mammals, and mammals have been doing this for millennium. And evolutionarily, there's a reason why we have different responses, different nurturing behaviors that are correlated with our hormones. We are not the same. We are equal in so many ways, but we are not the same in terms of our nurturing behaviors. That doesn't mean a father can't learn. It doesn't mean a father who wants to be the stay-at-home dad can't learn to be a sensitive, empathic nurturer. But if we can't acknowledge that we're different, then we can't teach what we need to teach. You said we need education. We need all kinds of education, but you can't educate a father that he's different than a mother if you're not admitting that he's different than a mother. If you want to raise children and be the primary attachment figure for your children, and it's usually the mother, sometimes it's the father now, but it's still usually the mother, children need a primary attachment figure as present as possible in the first 3 years if they are going to be mentally healthy in the future. All of the research shows that. If you're going to be as physically present as possible, unless you've saved a lot of money as a woman, you need to depend on your partner, on your team member. My husband and I were a team. Before we had children, we both earned a lot and worked really hard and spent our money equally, but then we decided it was a strategy. We were going to have children, and I was going to work as little as possible so I could be there for them. And he did the bulk of the earning. And now the joke is, I'm out in the world and I'm going to be taking over and he's going to be sitting by the pool, and I'd be fine with that. But that's what teamwork is. But the idea that I could lean on my husband financially in those years and not have to earn money and be able to be present for my children, there is a very good reason why that is critical for children. And we don't talk about children. We're sitting here, this is the first time we talked about children. We're talking about adults and individuals. And no, children are dependent on us. If you don't have to have children to be happy, but if you are going to bring children into this world, you have a responsibility to those children. And it surpasses any individual desire you may have.
And you're saying the mother should be there in those opening years?
The primary attachment figure, who's usually the mother. Daycare is terrible for children. Let's define daycare. Daycare is anything under the age of 3. Otherwise, we call it preschool. We used to call it nursery school, 3 to 5 before kindergarten. Okay. So anything under the age of 3 where you put your child in group care is daycare. And what it really is, they're day orphanages. You separate a baby who needs skin-to-skin contact, the sound of their mother's voice, her eyes, her physical and emotional presence to soothe that baby when they're in distress from moment to moment, to help to regulate their emotions. So 2 things mothers do. They buffer children from stress, which is so important because the part of their brain that regulates stress is meant to remain offline for the first year and very quietly, slowly come online for the next 2 years. So what are we doing? We're throwing babies into these institutional orphanages. It's overstimulating. It's stressful. If you walk into any daycare, you are going to hear many, many children crying. Children are not meant to cry much in the first year. They're meant to be held by their mothers and held against their mothers' bodies. So they buffer children from stress and they regulate their emotions. So what we're seeing as a mental health crisis is a crisis of emotional regulation issues in children, adolescents, and adults. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, these are all emotional regulation issues. That means people cannot regulate their emotions. And so we're just giving them pills. We're not saying, where does emotional regulation come from? What's the origin of it? And the origin of it is in the very early days of your life. If you had a mother who soothed you when you were in distress from moment to moment, it regulates your emotions. So it's only after 3, 85% of the right brain is developed by 3. It's only after 3 that you start to internalize the ability to regulate your own emotions or to deal with stress and adversity in the future.
So does that mean that if I'm not home as a mother for those early 3 years, you think there's possible chances that my child might grow up to be somewhat traumatized or have some kind of...
It is not what nature intended for us. And so we have made social changes that are about narcissism and self-orientation and me, and don't involve an understanding of children's irreducible developmental needs. And if we did, then maybe more women wouldn't have children, and that would be fine. I have no problem. I'm not a pronatalist. You don't have to have children to be happy. You can, build businesses, build houses, have loving, intimate relationships, not have children. But if you're going to have children, you need to know that dropping and running, putting them in daycare, or now, let's talk about very poor women, because this is always going to come back at me. What about very poor women? There are so many solutions for very poor women that do not involve daycare. And I hate when people say poor women have to rely on daycare. Why should they have to rely on daycare when rich women don't have to rely on daycare? And the truth is there are other solutions. Poor women can live together and support one another and form communities. They can share care of a caregiver. It's far better to have a single surrogate attachment figure, a babysitter who is a full-time babysitter, than putting a child in daycare. So if you can't be there and you're poor and you have to work, then it's far better to have first kinship bonds, someone who's related to you, because it's going to be a more similar investment in that child than anyone else. Secondly, a single surrogate caregiver, a babysitter or nanny. If you can't afford it, share the care with another mother, because that's still going to be better for that child than putting them into an institutional group environment. Because what you're doing is you're basically putting usually no less than 5 children with one caregiver under the age of 3. In some cases, it's under the age of 1. And if you've ever had a baby crying, you know that that baby is going to get the other babies crying. And now you have 5 babies crying. There's no way you can soothe them when they're in distress. There's no way you can regulate all those babies' emotions. We are doing terrible damage to our children by putting them in daycare. Now, daycare was the feminist agenda. It was about the second wave of feminism. They said, put your babies in daycare. It's the only way you're going to go back to work and work. And they didn't talk about children. The first wave of feminists, they talked about children. Mary Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft, they believed that mothering was powerful work. It was a career, it was admired, it was elevated. They also believed in fighting the patriarchy. They believed in equality, but they didn't forget about mothering. The second wave of feminists, I think it was Betty Friedan said that staying at home with your children she called it a concentration camp with comfort. That was the beginning of the tide. That's when the tide turned for women, where the narrative changed. So women who were loving being mothers and loving raising children suddenly were told that they were in a concentration camp and that they were prisoners and oppressed. And some of them were, and some of them probably shouldn't have had children, and many of them weren't. And even today, people write me every day and say, thank you for saying what you say, because society's narrative is so much about we have no value unless we go out into the workforce.
A lot of my friends tell me that effectively having a child is becoming an unpaid Uber driver for someone who doesn't want to go to karate and hates you anyway. And it's hard work.
But that is a narrative that I'm going to push back on, which is part of the problem, which is that it's the narrative of misery, which has been promoted. And it's not miserable to have children. It's joyful. It's the most incredible love you'll ever experience in your life, but it's also really hard. And I think we have a bunch of pussies, actually, right? We are producing women and men who are pussies. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. They cannot deal with discomfort. They cannot deal with frustration. They cannot deal with sacrifice or hardship or responsibility. They want it to be easy. Who said raising children was easy? You don't get the good stuff unless you put in the work. And it's the same if you're out in the world. Of course, it's easier to go to a job job than it is to stay home with a child, because a child demands more of you, but it also gives back more. And I'm going to say, this is not a binary equation here. So 66% may want to stay home, but they may want to stay home and have part-time work or do some work from home. It may not be as binary as you're making it out to be. It's not like you have to stay home for 3 years, and it's not an elitist idea. So can I just answer the guilt question? Because I didn't get to answer that, because you said you're making a lot of women feel guilty. So guilt is actually quite a healthy emotion. In small supply, guilt is a very healthy. It means that your ego is functioning. So if we're not just preoccupied as women on our own needs and desires and self-orientation and narcissistic sort of wishes, then listen, then we have to, if we're not just concerned with ourselves, then when we leave our very, very, very young children, we should feel badly, because those children need us. If we stop feeling badly for our children when we leave them, you break the bond. You can't turn off attachment. So a little bit of guilt means your ego is functioning. It's a good sign. Now, the response to that may not be that you can stay home with your children, even part-time, but at least it informs you. So whatever time you have with your children, you spend it wisely. I mean, I think it was Penelope Leach who said, well before me, that don't have children if you don't want to care for them, because you can have a very productive and creative life without having children. But if you're going to have children, you need to care for them, and they're your responsibility.
Push back on the word narcissistic, because I'm thinking of those nurses that I met down at the food bank. One of them had I think a 9-year-old, and the other had 2 small ones. The idea that woman is narcissistic in any way, you've used it a couple of times, and that she should feel guilty when she drops that child off. I feel so sad that it's another layer of, it's this healthy guilt. Women feel so much guilt all the time. Nobody is worried that women aren't feeling guilty enough. They are trying so hard. And this world is becoming more and more and more and more and more fraught with inequality. That nurse is running around desperately trying to give people, one of them said to me at one point, I want to give people even a good death. I don't want to leave them. I have to go over here and throw medicine at this person. This person is dying. I want to sit with them and hold their hand because they don't have any family or they're not here. We're talking about the most empathetic person.
I think we're asking too much of women.
Well, evidently, but to say that she used the word narcissistic because she's going to do her job as a nurse.
I didn't call that woman narcissistic. I said there's a tremendous amount of narcissism out there in women and in men, that they do not think about their children first. They think about them. Now, that doesn't mean that nurse may be the exception. And there's a lot of exceptions. But the truth is, we have a very narcissistically oriented society. We do. That's why we have all these narcissistic disorders. What do you think addictions are? Eating disorders, alcoholism, drug addiction. These are all narcissistic disorders. So why are they on the rise? Because narcissism doesn't make you a bad person. A narcissistic disorder means you were neglected as a child and you formed defenses to help you to cope with that neglect and that abandonment. And we are neglecting and abandoning our children on a very fundamental level in the years that they need us most, and they are developing as a result narcissistic disorders in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood.
Louise,